So we've got a new service bulletin out about a harness issue. I think this is the second, maybe third harness issue we've seen that Harley-Davidson has had to address officially. So let's take a look. So we have Service Bulletin M1657, which is also a recall of 0186. And it's 2024 center-cooled regulator wiring. Down here they note, the bulletin is to inform dealers that Harley-Davidson has learned that on certain 2024 touring and CVO touring vehicles built between October 27th, 2023 and July 18th of 2024, at the York Vehicle Operations, the regulator output wire, red wire, may rub on the front crankcase. Over time, the wire insulation may wear, exposing the wire and potentially causing a short to ground. If this occurs, your 60 amp fuse may blow, resulting in a loss of propulsion combined with a loss of all electrical power without any prior indication to the rider. The unexpected loss of propulsion combined with the loss of all electrical power while in motion without the ability to restart may increase the risk of a crash. Scrolling through the article, they first call out the VINs that are affected. You're going to have to go to Harley-Davidson dealer and figure that out because we don't have access to hd.net. But we do have the manufacturing date on our bike, so you can double check that. If we go further down, it'll note that there's a repair kit coming, and then they provide these steps to check to see if you have this issue. So quite a few steps here, but let's go down to the picture. So they show the regulator wire disconnected here, and then they're indicating it's kind of right after the connector is the point of concern. If we look further down, you can see what a failed version looks like. So it's worn through this cover here that this technician's holding with his finger, but there's a complete exposure of the wire. It is worn all the way through all of the protective outer covering as well as the shell of the wire itself. So that will then touch your frame and ground out the voltage regulator, and then therefore disabling your bike, potentially while you're riding. If we look further down, they note that the fix is to use a wire tie. I think we've seen this before, adding a wire tie. So they show a picture of that. You want to take your voltage regulator wire and then you want to wrap it around the cooling harness and then zip that together. And they give you a picture here of what it looks like before you pull the zip tie tight. And then if we go down, they talk about, well, what if you need a repair? Well, if you need a repair, they want you to disconnect the wire and pull it out. And then they want you to measure a couple lengths on the red wire and the black wire. So measure those lengths and tape those off. And then if you keep going, they want you to cut those. So you'll end up severing the connection at those 2 points of distance. And then you will take the repair, which is a new connector, and they note it's got the shrink wrap tubing on it, and you can see the black wire is shorter than the red wire because when you solder the two together, you don't want the two connection points at the same point, otherwise it'll create a big bulge in the wiring harness. So they offset those. They note you need the protective sleeve in place before you solder it on, otherwise you won't be able to slide it down. And then they give you directions on how to solder it. And they show using solder paste and then putting the two wires together, and it looks all nice and neat here. I doubt they got that on their first attempt. What's interesting here is they show using a thin wire gauge to wrap around it, and then they also show a ring, so taking a ring to put the two together. And then they note you need to solder it, but you can notice when they solder it, both the wire and the ring are gone. I've never tried to solder one with a ring around it or a light wire, so I'm not really sure what the purpose of that was. And you can show they're showing how to solder the two together. And then you pull the shrink wrap down and warm it up and shrink it. And then they show how it should look when it's mounted correctly. So they show There's a connector here that's mounted but to the frame. But then again, they want to show you how it routes, and then they want you to use that zip tie technique. So they show the zip tie here, wrapping the regulator harness to the cooling harness. And then they note all the different customer codes and what the reimbursement is, and etc. So I don't know about you, but that's pretty scary. And I'm not sure if I want to make sure my bike falls within the recall dates, or I just want to verify that wire is not rubbing. I think regardless of what your manufacturer date is, whether you have a Road Glide, a Street Glide, or CVO or CVO ST, 23.5 or 24, you should check this out. You certainly don't want to just lose power completely while on the road. So let's go to the bike. So you can verify your manufacturing date by looking on your left down tube. So right by your coolant reservoir, they actually just put it on there. It says date manufactured. Mine was June of 23. You can also decipher this from the VIN of the bike. So you can do this check with the bike on the side stand, but I recommend you turn your handlebars one direction or the other, depending what side of the bike you're going to work from. I'm going to work from the right side of the bike, so I'm actually going to turn the handlebars all the way to the right to give me some room to get that shroud off. This shroud is just held on by 4 grommets, one on each corner. So you can actually just gently pull on it and it'll come out. So one corner is loose, and then you can pull the other corner loose. And then you'll pull the top right corner out, and then the top left corner out. You can see I'm grabbing the crash bar here to give me a little leverage, because you want to pull it out slowly. So now that it's loose, you're going to rotate it to get it out. Be careful, because it will rub on the ground and you will scuff it. But there we go. So now we can see this is our voltage regulator and our radiator. And basically Harley wants you to loosen all this stuff so you can lean it forward so you can see behind it. But if we go underneath and from the back, I think we can inspect it successfully without all that work. Just looking from the back, so here's my muffler. I can see the wire right there in the sheathing, and I'm not seeing anywhere where it's connecting with the engine case. So if I follow the harness down, this is the regular wire harness, you can see it's already zip tied, pretty close to the way they show in the fix. But then I have another zip tie that's loose, that's just kind of holding it in place. So it looks okay, I don't see it rubbing. But what I did notice, if I move the harness out of the way, you can see right there, it appears to be rubbing right there. And if I look, there's a good mark where it's been rubbing, but you can see it's not gone through this protective material. But I only have about 4,000 miles on the bike. So it's clearly rubbing there, even though it's not wearing through, there looks like there's some wearing going on there. Is that a concern? Potentially there's just a design flaw in this center cooled setup. They've got the radiator and all of the components that make it work at the bottom of the bike. It hides it really well, which is where the oil cooler used to be, so it doesn't look like it's liquid cooled at all. But it sure exposes all of this to rocks and debris coming up off the road. Now many people have had issues with all this exposed wiring underneath, and a couple have had real disasters on the road where something's come up and ripped these wires up. So we know Thrash and Supply, Juan there, has designed a great skid plate to go under here. I really wonder if Harley will have to address this in the 25 models, and will we see their own version of a skid plate? Well, I really don't know how much of a concern that rubbing is, but clearly it's led to a problem on some of the 24s, and that is clearly rubbing. So I think I'm going to at least take some hose. I have some old tubing here, some fuel line hose, and I'm just going to wrap that around it, just for my own confidence. Now I will say, I never recommend modifying your wiring harness, especially how items route, because you just don't know what the downstream impacts could be of doing so. You may create an issue somewhere else. So I always recommend follow Harley-Davidson's manuals and follow how the routing goes, or seek advice from a Harley-Davidson dealer. Remember, I'm not a professional, I'm just an enthusiast. But I'm going to do something about that just for my own confidence. But again, I'm taking my own risk in doing so. There's clearly been many issues with this wiring harness. Early on, I noticed that my heated gear connector in my right throttle grip actually had been rubbing and it exposed the wire, which could have created a short. So I had to tape that up. And then we've had the early recall with the wiring harness rubbing on the belt. So you had to zip tie that up out of the way of the belt. So I think there's clearly issues with how the harness is routed. There's all kinds of electrical issues and all kinds of problems that'll be created by any wire that gets rubbed on and exposed, pinched, or crimped. And I know many YouTubers have put videos out about issues they've had with their new bikes, and most of them have come down to some issue with the harness. My advice would be to get a good flashlight and then run the light across all the wires on your bike. Just follow the harness from the front to the back and see if there's anything out of place, and especially if there's anything that looks like it's been rubbing. I would pull your seat off and look at all the wires under there, and again, follow from the neck of the head bearing all the way down and back to the bike. Just follow the harness with a good flashlight and look for any potential issues. This is just good maintenance. So another harness issue with these new bikes. I would get out in the garage and at least take a little quick look at all your wires and see what's going on. I sure hope you found this information useful, and if you did, you'll go share it with someone else. But until next time, in the friction zone.